Good morning, Alex and friends. I'm Grace. Today is Monday, March 2nd, 2026, and you're listening to Alex's News. The high in Riverside today is 77.5 degrees, with a low of 58.8, so expect a mild and pleasant day ahead. Coming up, we'll examine the reasons behind the FBI's decision to fire agents involved in the probe of Trump's classified documents and unpack what's driving the wave of simultaneous teacher strikes across California. Plus, we'll cover other key stories making headlines. All this and more coming up on Alex's News. Stay tuned. We're starting this morning with a shakeup at the FBI that's raising serious questions about the independence of federal law enforcement. Director Kash Patel has fired at least 10 to 12 employees who worked on the investigation into President Trump's handling of classified documents at Mar-a-Lago. Ethan's been following this story closely. Ethan, what do we know about who was let go?
The firings happened late last week, between roughly Tuesday and Thursday. The Washington Post and CBS News report that about 6 of those dismissed were based in the FBI's Miami field office. That's the same office that carried out the August 2022 search of Mar-a-Lago. And it wasn't just special agents. Analysts and support staff who played roles in the probe were also terminated.
So what triggered this particular round of firings?
It goes back to a Reuters report that came out earlier this month. It revealed that the FBI, under previous leadership during the Biden administration, had secretly subpoenaed the phone records of Patel himself and White House Chief of Staff Susie Wiles. Both were private citizens at the time. Patel called it, quote, outrageous government overreach, end quote, and said investigators used flimsy pretexts to obtain that metadata.
When you say metadata, what exactly are we talking about?
It's information like who called whom, the date, the time, and how long the call lasted. It doesn't include the actual content of conversations. But Patel says the real problem isn't just that the subpoenas happened. He alleges the records were buried in what he calls prohibited case files inside the FBI's Sentinel system, restricted folders that don't show up in standard internal searches, essentially hidden from future leadership and audits.
Has anyone backed up that claim?
Senator Chuck Grassley, who chairs the Judiciary Committee, has presented evidence supporting the existence of those restricted files, according to the Washington Post and the Federalist. Republican lawmakers have also tied the subpoenas to a broader 2022 FBI investigation reportedly codenamed Arctic Frost. They allege it was used as a pretext to target Republican figures. And Axios and Reuters reported the FBI may have recorded a 2023 phone call between Wiles and her attorney, raising serious attorney-client privilege concerns.
Did the investigators actually break any laws with those subpoenas, though?
That's where it gets complicated. Former Special Counsel Jack Smith testified before the House Judiciary Committee back in January and defended the subpoenas as standard investigative procedure. Under the Electronic Communications Privacy Act, toll records can be obtained through a grand jury subpoena without a warrant. Smith said Wiles' records were relevant because investigators got a tip that Trump showed her a classified map on a plane. And Patel's records mattered because he'd publicly claimed Trump had declassified everything. Legal analysts, including experts from the Cato Institute, are split. The subpoenas appear lawful, but hiding the results in restricted files has drawn real concern.
Let's step back for a moment. Remind us how this whole investigation started.
The probe launched back in March of 2022 under Special Counsel Jack Smith. The Hill reports that about 300 documents bearing classified markings were ultimately found at Mar-a-Lago. Trump faced a 37-count indictment, including charges under the Espionage Act and obstruction of justice. But U.S. District Judge Aileen Cannon dismissed the case in July 2024, ruling Smith's appointment was unconstitutional.
And Judge Cannon's been in the news again just this past week, right?
She has. Late last week, she permanently blocked the release of Volume 2 of Jack Smith's final report. That's the volume specifically about the classified documents investigation. She ruled releasing it would cause, quote, manifest injustice, end quote, partly because Smith was unlawfully appointed. Groups like American Oversight have accused the administration of coordinating with the judiciary to suppress the truth while purging the investigators who uncovered it.
These firings didn't come out of nowhere, though. There's been a broader pattern here.
Absolutely. This is the latest chapter in a sweeping personnel overhaul that started when Patel took over early last year. The Washington Post, PBS, and The Guardian have documented several high-profile removals. Brian Driscoll Jr., who briefly served as acting FBI director in January 2025, was fired after he resisted demands to hand over a list of agents who'd worked on January 6th investigations. Stephen Jensen, who led the Washington field office, was terminated after overseeing domestic terrorism sections tied to that same probe.
Were there others pushed out too?
James Dennehy, who ran the New York field office, was forced into retirement after reportedly advising his people to resist handing over names. Paul Brown, the special agent in charge in Atlanta, was removed after reportedly questioning the administration's interest in seizing 2020 election records from Fulton County, Georgia. And The Independent reports that at least 30 agents deemed insufficiently conservative have been fired since Trump took office, for things like attending Black Lives Matter protests or displaying gay pride flags.
Some of these fired officials are fighting back in court, aren't they?
They are. Back in September, Driscoll, Jensen, and Spencer Evans filed a federal lawsuit called Driscoll v. Patel in the D.C. District Court. Courthouse News Service and Time both covered the filing extensively. The complaint contains a striking allegation that Patel admitted the firings were, quote, likely illegal, end quote, during a 14-minute meeting with Driscoll. He allegedly told him, quote, the FBI tried to put the president in jail and he hasn't forgotten it, end quote.
Where does that lawsuit stand right now?
It's still active as of today. The administration filed a motion to dismiss, arguing the president and the FBI director have broad authority over personnel decisions. According to Democracy Docket, Judge Gia Cobb set this coming Friday, March 6th, as the deadline for the government's final reply brief. And just about 2 weeks ago, 16 democracy scholars filed an amicus brief, urging the court to reject the dismissal, arguing these politicized firings follow a pattern typical of Democratic backsliding.
What are the plaintiffs actually asking for?
They want reinstatement, back pay, and a formal declaration that the firings violated the First and Fifth Amendments. They're also citing federal statutes that protect members of the FBI's senior executive service from removal without proper procedures. PBS reports this could set a major precedent for whether career civil servants can be punished for carrying out lawfully authorized investigations.
How is the rank and file at the FBI reacting to all this?
The FBI Agents Association, which represents active duty special agents, has been one of the most vocal critics. The Independent and The Hill both reported the association condemned the firings as unlawful last Wednesday. They warned that stripping the Bureau of experienced investigators creates a brain drain that puts national security at risk. PBS and CBS News cite internal reports suggesting a severe morale crisis, with career agents fearing they could be targeted for any past work on politically sensitive cases.
And what's the administration saying to justify all of this?
Patel and the White House have framed it as an effort to, quote, re-professionalize, end quote, the FBI. They say they're removing what they call weaponized elements of the deep state. Patel has publicly stated the previous leadership tried to put the president in jail, and that accountability is long overdue. It's worth noting, though, that Patel himself has faced scrutiny. The Independent reports he's used government planes for personal travel, including a trip to the Olympics in Italy, which critics say undercuts his claims about restoring professionalism.
Lot still unfolding here, especially with that court deadline just days away.
That's right. Friday's filing deadline could be a turning point. If the judge allows the case to move forward, it may become the first real judicial check on what critics across the political spectrum have called a historically unprecedented purge of the nation's premier law enforcement agency.
Ethan, thanks for walking us through all of that. We turn now to our second story this morning. Dozens of California school districts are caught up in a wave of teacher strikes and labor actions. Chloe has been following this one closely. Chloe, this isn't just a few isolated disputes, is it?
No, not at all, Grace. This is one of the most deliberately coordinated labor campaigns in American education history. Cal Matters and LAist report that the California Teachers Association spent years engineering this moment through what they call their We Can't Wait campaign. CTA President David Goldberg has openly said the clustering of these strikes was, quote, deliberate, end quote, designed to garner public attention and flex political muscle.
So how did one union coordinate strikes across an entire state?
It was methodical. According to LAist, CTA leadership worked with local affiliates to align contract expiration dates to a single window, June 30th of last year. That meant as many as 32 districts suddenly needed new contracts at the same time. When negotiations stalled, the strikes didn't trickle out one by one. They cascaded across the state, turning what could have been small local disputes into a statewide crisis.
What's driving the financial pressure underneath all of this?
The biggest factor is what people are calling the COVID cliff. During the pandemic, billions in federal emergency relief dollars flowed into California schools. Districts used that money to hire staff, expand mental health services, and boost pay. But those were always one-time funds, and now they've dried up. CBS News and Cal Matters report districts are left with massive budget holes because they used temporary money to fund permanent positions.
And enrollment drops are making that worse?
Exactly. Lookout Santa Cruz reports that Pajaro Valley Unified has lost 15% of its students since 2017. California funds schools on a per-pupil basis, so fewer kids mean fewer dollars. But the fixed costs, things like buildings and administration, don't shrink with enrollment. That squeeze is hitting districts all across the state.
Let's talk about the biggest flashpoint. San Francisco had its first teacher strike in decades.
The first since 1979. Members of United Educators of San Francisco walked out for 4 days in early February. Then, just 2 days ago, on Saturday, union members ratified a new contract with 92% approval, according to Local News Matters and the Frisk. Teachers got a 5% raise over 2 years, while lower-paid workers like paraeducators secured 8.5%. The district also agreed to fully fund family health care starting in January 2027.
That sounds like a big win for the union. But what's it costing the district?
It's steep. The deal runs $183 million, funded through rainy day reserves and parcel tax revenue. SF Gate reports the district still faces a structural deficit north of $100 million. The board has already approved 42 preliminary layoff notices just to stay solvent. So the strike may be over, but the financial crisis definitely isn't.
Were there problems with how the district was managing money in the first place?
That's a really important part of this story. An independent audit by the San Francisco Budget and Legislative Analyst found the district spent $394 per student on central office administration. That's nearly double the state average of $201. A follow-up audit uncovered what they called material weaknesses in financial controls, including a $10 million payroll system failure and cases of fraudulent interception of employee payroll deposits.
What about Oakland? There was almost a strike there, too.
It came down to the wire. SF Gate and CBS News report, Oakland reached a tentative deal at 3 a.m. last Friday after an 18-hour bargaining marathon, just barely avoiding a walkout. The agreement gives most educators an 11% raise and veteran teachers 13% over 2 years. Oakland also agreed to cut kindergarten and first-grade class sizes to 22 students, down from 29.
But Oakland has its own budget troubles, right?
Major ones. Just 48 hours before that deal, the school board voted to lay off 400 workers to address a $105 million deficit. A February report from the state's Fiscal Crisis and Management Assistance Team found Oakland repeatedly failed to follow through on its own sustainability plans. The Oakland report notes the district spent 204% of the state average on services and operating costs. The union is now fighting to rescind those layoffs before the May 15th deadline.
And what's happening down in Pajaro Valley?
That situation is still unresolved and very tense. Last week, over 150 teachers and supporters staged a walkout during a board meeting. Lookout Santa Cruz and the Californian report they were protesting the board's approval of 160 layoffs, including 80 teachers and 13 mental health clinicians. The district says it needs to close a $15.3 million deficit. No formal strike date yet, but the union has said, quote, "The time for talk is over," end quote.
You mentioned mental health clinicians. Are unions pushing for more than just raises?
They are, and that's what makes this wave different. LAist and Ground News report that unions across the state have adopted what they call bargaining for the common good. That means demanding hard caps on class sizes, guaranteed staffing for nurses and counselors, and even housing assistance for teachers. In San Francisco, union reps pointed out that an $80,000 starting salary actually qualifies as low income under the city's cost of living thresholds. It's incredibly hard to recruit teachers who can't afford to live where they teach.
There's also a political angle to all of this, isn't there?
A big one. CalMatters and Ballotpedia report that the CTA and its partners filed a ballot measure late last year to permanently extend Proposition 55. That's the tax surcharge on high earners that generates between $5 billion and $15 billion a year for schools. The current tax doesn't actually expire until 2030, but the union wants to lock it in now. Union literature from earlier this year explicitly links strike solidarity to the grassroots work needed to pass that measure in November.
So the strikes are also building a campaign operation?
That's exactly the argument critics are making. The California Policy Center has called the strike wave a, quote, political stranglehold, end quote, on Sacramento, timed to pressure lawmakers during an election year. The CTA frames it differently, saying the strikes are a symptom of a funding system that hasn't kept pace with costs. Their pitch to voters is that the only way to prevent future strikes is to guarantee permanent revenue through that tax extension.
Is there a case that funding isn't really the core problem here?
There is. According to the Public Policy Institute of California, the state now spends $20,496 per pupil. That's roughly $2,800 more than the national average. Fiscal watchdogs argue the real issue is how districts allocate and manage that money. When you see districts with above-average spending still facing insolvency, it starts to look like a spending problem more than a revenue problem.
What should we watch for in the weeks ahead?
The big date is March 15th. That's the statutory deadline for districts to issue teacher layoff notices, and it's expected to be a major flashpoint. Los Angeles, Twin Rivers, and Natomas have all recently authorized strikes, according to Ground News. So this wave isn't winding down. If anything, it could intensify through the spring and carry right into campaign season for that November ballot measure.
Such a complex story with so many moving pieces. Chloe, thank you for walking us through all of it.
Thanks, Grace.
Here are some other headlines. The Supreme Court has delivered a major ruling on mail, or rather, on the failure to deliver it. In a 5-4 decision yesterday, the High Court sided with the United States Postal Service in USPS versus Conan, finding that the federal government cannot be sued even when postal employees intentionally withhold mail. Justice Clarence Thomas wrote for the majority that the so-called postal exception in the Federal Tort Claims Act broadly covers intentional acts of misdirection, not just negligent ones. The case stemmed from a Texas landlord who alleged postal workers withheld her mail for 2 years due to racial prejudice. Justice Sonia Sotomayor dissented sharply, warning the ruling strips accountability for what she called malicious misconduct. In an unusual split, conservative Justice Neil Gorsuch broke ranks to join the 3 liberal dissenters, arguing the majority's reading went beyond the plain text of the law. The National Newspaper Association has already voiced concern that the decision leaves businesses reliant on mail, with virtually no stamp of legal protection. Switching gears to trade, the Trump administration is in a tariff-icy scramble after the Supreme Court struck down tariffs imposed under the International Emergency Economic Powers Act earlier this month. To bridge the gap, the president has dusted off a rarely used provision, Section 122 of the Trade Act of 1974, imposing a 15% global tariff that expires in 150 days by late July. Meanwhile, U.S. Trade Representative Jamieson Greer has launched accelerated Section 301 investigations to build a more permanent legal foundation for country-specific duties. Importers aren't waiting around. Over 2,000 claims have already been filed seeking refunds on an estimated $175 billion in duties collected under the now unlawful regime. Supply chains worldwide are bracing for important volatility. In California, a scandal dubbed Pippigate has parents and lawmakers seeing red. Fourth graders at Delavan Drive Elementary in Los Angeles used school-issued software to create book covers for Pippi Longstocking, but instead of the beloved character, the AI tool generated sexualized images of women in lingerie. The parent group Schools Beyond Screens is demanding stricter oversight, and the California Department of Education has issued updated guidelines favoring human-centered AI use over blanket bans. Legislators have introduced Senate Bill 243 mandating safeguards against explicit AI content for minors, alongside Assembly Bill 2291, which proposes a confidential hotline for students to report deepfake harassment. You might say California is trying to filter out the problem. On the healthcare front, despite federal premium subsidies expiring, California's insurance marketplace enrollment dipped only 2.7% to 1.9 million. But there's a bronze lining nobody wanted. 1 in 3 new enrollees chose high-deductible bronze plans, up from 1 in 4 last year. Experts warn that deductibles reaching $5,800 often discourage patients from seeking care at all. 22% of middle-income Californians simply canceled coverage entirely. The state allocated $190 million in supplemental credits, though critics say that still leaves the middle class absorbing a 10% average premium hike. And finally, Uber is driving a November 2026 ballot initiative to cap personal injury lawyers' contingency fees at 25% for all vehicle crashes. Trial lawyers and medical providers have united in opposition, raising over $55 million to defeat it. Attorney groups have filed 3 counter-initiatives targeting Uber's liability. With Uber committing over $32.5 million, this is shaping up to be one of the most expensive ballot battles in California history. That's all we have for now. Today's episode was made by Alexander King with Claude Opus 4.6, Gemini Pro 3.1, Gemini Flash 3, and Google Cloud Text-to-Speech. I hope you have a great day. I'll see you tomorrow, Alex.